Terry Molton was born in March 1970 in Grass Valley, California, and was adopted shortly after birth by Carol and Larry Molton, a married couple who both worked as elementary school teachers. In 1982, when Terry was around 12 years old, the family relocated to Roseburg, Oregon. In November 1991, she married her first husband, Ron Tarver Jr., and the couple relocated to Albany, Oregon, where they took over a storage facility business. With financial backing from Terry's parents, the couple subsequently invested in a franchise restaurant called Chubby's. That venture ultimately failed, and in 1994, the fallout led Terry, Ron, and her parents to jointly sue the franchise company, and they eventually settled for $250,000. In March 1993, she became pregnant with her first child with Ron Tarver, and on January 26, 1994, she gave birth to a son named James. The marriage to Tarver did not survive much longer, however. By November 1995, the couple had divorced, and Terry was granted custody of James. She then moved back into her parents' home in Roseburg, where she took a job working at a McDonald's in the nearby town of Cottage Grove. Her second marriage followed relatively quickly. In August 1996, she married Richard Ecker in Springfield, Oregon. About 2 years later, Terry's life took an unexpected turn when she was struck by a drunk driver, an accident that left her with severe migraines and a pinched nerve that would affect her for some time afterward. Despite these injuries, she pursued higher education during this period, working toward a bachelor's degree in elementary education at Northwest Christian University. That same year, in August 1998, Richard formally adopted Terry's son, James. By 2000, Terry had completed her education and obtained a teaching license. The family relocated to Beaverton specifically to pursue teaching jobs in the area. In February of 2001, the couple purchased a house in Aloha, Oregon, with financial assistance once again coming from Terry's parents. The following month, March 2001, Terry began working as a substitute teacher within the Hillsborough School District. Terry's second marriage came to an end in the middle of 2002. Terry received primary custody of her son James, but notably, Richard chose to pay child support for James even after the divorce. That same spring, Terry began working out intensely at a Bali Total Fitness location in Aloha. By June of that same year, a long-term substitute teaching assignment Terry held at Lenox Elementary School came to an end, and that same month she met Horman, who had also recently divorced. The two began dating almost immediately. The timing created complications. In August 2002, his ex, Desiree Young, filed for divorce from Kane while she was 8 months pregnant with their son. This child was born the following month on September 9th in Portland and was named Kyron. By December, just 3 months after Kyron was born, Terry and her son James had moved in with Kane. The following year, Terry earned a master's degree in art education from Pacific University while continuing to work as a substitute teacher. A significant shift in the family's custody arrangement occurred in 2004. Desiree Young relocated to Canada that year to pursue extensive medical treatment for kidney failure. This resulted in Kane assuming full custody of Kyron, though Desiree remained actively involved in her son's upbringing despite the distance. With these new arrangements, Terry stepped into a caregiving role for young Kyron during this period. Specific accounts describe Terry teaching Kyron sign language and being the one who first recognized that he needed glasses. The year 2005 marked a notable transformation in Terry's lifestyle and behavior that would later draw scrutiny from investigators and media. In January 2005, Terry began an intensive bodybuilding regimen that dramatically transformed her physique over the following months. Alongside her physical transformation, Terry reportedly developed increased irritability, which some accounts attributed to her use of stimulants during this period. Her dedication to bodybuilding culminated in April 2005, when she competed in the Emerald Cup bodybuilding competition. Just months after that competition, on July 10th, Terry was arrested for a DUI while her son James was a passenger in the vehicle. She subsequently completed a court-ordered diversion program in connection with the arrest, allowing her to avoid more serious legal consequences. Unable to secure a full-time teaching position, she returned to the restaurant industry in December 2005, accepting an assistant manager position at a Red Robin restaurant. She would leave that position roughly 8 months later in August 2006. Furthermore, the family's living situation changed substantially at the end of the year. In December, Kane sold the family's home and they relocated to a secluded rural property in northwest Portland. Terry eventually found work in this new area as an assistant manager at a Newport Bay restaurant. A few months later, on April 15, 2007, the couple got married. The following month, Kane gave Terry a red Ford Mustang as a Mother's Day gift. The next major family development came in March 2008, when Terry announced she was pregnant again, a pregnancy that reportedly came as a surprise to Kane. On November 12th, Kiara was born, becoming the only biological child shared by Terry and Kane. During this period, Terry reportedly struggled significantly with postpartum depression. The months following Kiara's birth brought escalating tension within the household. In May 2009, roughly 6 months after her daughter was born, Terry began taking antidepressant medication to address her ongoing PPD, and Kane began to take notice. The most serious and consequential allegation from this stretch emerged in late 2009. According to later accounts, Terry reportedly hired a landscaper without Kane's knowledge and allegedly attempted to persuade this landscaper to kill Kane, offering him $10,000. This landscaper, later identified as Rodolfo Sanchez, would go on to inform police. Family tensions also affected Terry's relationship with her older son during this window. In January 2010, James moved out of the household to live with Terry's parents in Roseburg, following what has been described as a conflict with his mother. Kane has stated that Terry made this decision to send James away while Kane himself was traveling for business. The following month, Terry took a step toward returning to her teaching career by renewing her teaching certificate. On Friday, June 4th, Terry arrived at Skyline Elementary School with 7-year-old Kyron. The doors were open at 8 a.m. to accommodate the science fair. Kyron was in the 2nd grade and was eager to show off his project on red tree frogs. At 8:15 a.m., PTA President Gina Zimmerman observed Kyron standing with Terry directly in front of his science fair exhibit. According to Terry's later statements to investigators, she remained at the school until 8:45 a.m., at which point she said she watched Kyron walk down the hallway toward his classroom before she herself left the building. No other adult witness has ever been identified who corroborates Kyron actually entering his classroom or being seen by anyone after this point. A separate, uncorroborated account emerged from a child. They later reported seeing Kyron near the school's south entrance at approximately 9 a.m. If accurate, this would place Kyron still on or near school property roughly 15 minutes after Terry says she departed, but this report was never definitively confirmed as accurate by investigators. Terry's own account of her whereabouts became the main point of scrutiny in the weeks and months that followed. According to her statements, after leaving the school at 8:45, she ran errands at 2 separate Fred Meyer grocery store locations, which lasted until around 10 a.m. The gap in distance between the 2 stores was roughly 15 minutes. From around 10:10 a.m. to 11:40, Terry stated that she drove her toddler daughter Kiara around town, explaining that she was using the motion of the car in an attempt to soothe the child, who was suffering from an earache. Following this, Terry said she went to a local gym and exercised, remaining there until approximately 12:40 p.m. By 1:20, she had returned home, and at that time, she posted a photograph of Kyron standing at his science fair exhibit to her Facebook page. The disappearance was not discovered until the end of the school day, meaning Kyron had already been missing for roughly 7 hours by the time anyone raised an alarm. At 3:30 p.m., Terry and Kane went together to meet Kyron's school bus at its regular stop. When the bus arrived, the driver informed them that Kyron had not boarded that afternoon. This prompted an immediate call to the school, where staff delivered a second piece of alarming news. The boys' homeroom teacher, Christina Porter, had marked him absent for the entire day when class began at 10 a.m. With this information in hand, the school's secretary, Susan Hall, placed a call to the police at 3:56 p.m. to formally report Kyron missing. 3 minutes later, both the Portland Police Bureau and the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to respond. What followed was a full-scale search operation. The first search teams physically arrived at Skyline School at 8:09 p.m. Lieutenant Mary Lindstrand arrived 6 minutes later and began emailing Kyron's photograph to local media outlets. By 10:40, officers had completed an initial search sweep of both Skyline School and the family's residence without locating Kyron. Just 4 minutes later, a tipster called to suggest that officers check a nearby train tunnel where local children were known to play. By the early morning hours of Saturday, June 5th, the search operation had already grown substantially. At 5 a.m., search and rescue was formally called in, and upon arrival, organizers found that 60 to 70 people were already involved in searching the area. Around midday, a spokesman stated publicly that the search remained classified as a missing person case rather than a criminal investigation. That evening, news conferences held at 4 o'clock and 8 p.m. confirmed that both the FBI and the National Guard had now joined the search effort. Sunday, June 6th, brought both an expansion of resources and the first formal acknowledgement from officials of how unusual the situation was. At 8:58 a.m., Terry posted to her Facebook page about ordering 1,000 missing person flyers to help distribute Kyron's photograph and description as widely as possible. That same day, the FBI announced it had brought in a criminal profiler. June 18th marked a major turning point in the narrative surrounding the case. That day, the sheriff's office released a flyer that, for the first time, explicitly sought information connected to Terry herself rather than focusing solely on Kyron. The flyer included photographs of Kyron, Terry, and a white pickup truck, and it specifically requested any information the public might have about sightings of that truck at the two Fred Meyer locations where Terry had supposedly visited. At 2 p.m. that day, Captain Jason Gates held a briefing confirming that Kyron's family had approved the release of the flyer, and he used the opportunity to dispel some of the false rumors that had been circulating. That evening, a friend of Terry's reported that she would be undergoing a second polygraph exam, indicating that her first test results had not resolved investigators' questions. The weekend of June 26th brought the tensions within the family's household into public view. Two separate calls to the police were placed from the family residence, one reportedly concerning a threat and the other related to a custody dispute. Kane moved out of the home that same day, taking the couple's 19-month-old daughter Kiara with him. On June 28th, reports began circulating that Terry had been formally served with both divorce papers and a restraining order. That same day, Kane, Desiree Young, and Desiree's husband, Tony, released a joint public statement. Notably, it conspicuously excluded any mention of Terry by name. The implications were obvious. On July 4th, the previously mentioned scheme in which Terry allegedly attempted to hire someone to kill her husband started to circulate publicly. That same day, a separate source confirmed that Terry was also involved in a drunk driving arrest back in 2005. In the days immediately following the revelation, Kyron's family escalated its public campaign against Terry's continued silence. Desiree Young once again publicly called on Terry to cooperate with authorities. 2 days later, the contents of Kane's restraining order petition were finally released. His explicit written statement said, "I believe the respondent is involved in the disappearance of my son Kyron, who has been missing since June 4th. On July 10th, Kane gave an interview to ABC News in which he raised the possibility that Terry might have been suffering from some form of postpartum depression, offering the public a potential psychological explanation for whatever role she might have played in the unfolding tragedy. Kane filed a formal motion accusing Terry of violating the terms of the restraining order against her in 3 distinct ways. These included carrying on a romantic relationship with one of his childhood friends, improperly sharing sealed legal information related to the case, and attempting to kidnap their daughter Kiara. Financial and housing disputes came to the forefront just a day later. Terry requested that Kane provide her with money to help her move out of the family home. Kane sought a court order to have Terry removed from the home immediately. She ultimately agreed and moved back to her hometown of Roseburg, Oregon. On September 15th, the sheriff's office announced it was scaling back the investigation due to costs that had already exceeded $1 million. As the criminal investigation slowed, the legal battle over custody and visitation with Kiara intensified. In October 2010, Terry petitioned for visitation rights with her daughter. Kane objected and sought a mental health evaluation, later submitting an affidavit describing Terry as emotionally disturbed. Terry's attorneys countered by accusing Kane of trying to destroy her relationship with Kiara, but on November 2nd, Terry withdrew her request for parenting time. Weekend dive searches of Sauvie Island continued in mid-November, and on November 15th, Desiree Young publicly accused Terry of hating Kyron during an appearance on the Today Show, while criticizing Kane's handling of the situation as well. Search efforts persisted sporadically into early 2011, including an unsuccessful search of forested hills west of Sauvie Island on January 30th. By June, Sheriff Staten announced that the formal task force dedicated to the case would disband on July 1st. The case took a new legal turn in 2012. On June 1st, Desiree Young filed a $10 million civil lawsuit against Terry, alleging she was responsible for Kyron's disappearance and had effectively kidnapped him. Later that year, a judge referred to Terry as a prime suspect in the case. In August 2012, a federal judge denied Terry's motion to delay the civil suit. However, on July 30th, 2013, Young dropped the lawsuit, explaining that continuing it risked interfering with the still active police investigation and citing Terry's continued silence. That December, a judge finalized Kane and Terry's divorce more than 3 years after it was first filed. In June 2014, Kane was awarded full custody of Kiara, with Terry granted only supervised visitation. In August 2014, a judge denied Terry's request to legally change her name, citing the ongoing investigation. She filed another petition that November, but withdrew it in December after public backlash. In February 2015, it was revealed Terry had taken a caregiving job under her maiden name, but she left the position later that month after her identity attracted public attention. That August, Terry's roommate reported a stolen gun, and Terry was implicated in the incident. In September 2016, Terry broke her long public silence in an interview with Dr. Phil, stating she had been advised by law enforcement, her then husband, and attorneys not to speak publicly, and denying any involvement in Kyron's disappearance. She offered an alternative theory, claiming she had seen a man behaving strangely near a white Ford pickup truck outside a 7-Eleven on Highway 30, a location she said was not near the school. In March 2018, Terry remarried in Nevada. The case gained significant fresh attention in 2026. In late February, it emerged that Kyron's name had appeared in an anonymous tip to the FBI contained within the recently released Epstein files, alongside references to other long-missing children. However, officials and Kyron's family stressed that the tip was uncorroborated and that no verified connection between the case and Jeffrey Epstein exists. On the afternoon of Thursday, April 1st, 1976, 3 oil rig workers from a Standard Drilling Company were passing time near a worksite in Oklahoma City while waiting for a colleague to arrive. Growing bored, the men wandered toward an abandoned house at 325 Northeast 6th Street in the Research Park neighborhood, a property that has since been demolished and replaced by a modern apartment building. Finding the front door boarded shut, 2 of the men entered through an unlocked back door, while the third slipped in through a hole in the side of the structure. The 3 were immediately struck by an overwhelming odor they later described to police as the scent of death. As 2 of the men pushed further into the house, they stumbled over an object near the back door and instinctively kicked it aside without realizing what it was. One of the men, carrying a stick, began poking through debris and knocked over a discarded popcorn bucket sitting near the back door. A head rolled out, and the man mistook it for a dog's head before another corrected him. It was a human head so disfigured that all 3 men later admitted they struggled to immediately recognize it. The men fled to call authorities, but because the date was April Fool's Day, the first people they told did not believe them. Responding officers quickly confirmed the discovery was real and secured the scene. Investigators went on to find the victim's arms, legs, and torso scattered throughout the derelict house, and determined that the object the 2 men had kicked aside near the back door was, in fact, the victim's severed thigh. Investigators noted that the victim's reproductive organs had been removed and were never recovered from the scene, leading police to theorize the killer had kept them as a trophy. One of her hands was also missing. Early theories proposed that scavenging animals had torn the body apart, but this was ruled out within days once an autopsy revealed the cuts had been made with deliberate precision. Oklahoma State Medical Examiner Dr. J. Chapman determined that the woman had been killed before being cut apart, and stated that she had been, quote, dissected in an anatomically correct fashion. While investigators withheld the specific cause of death, the autopsy indicated she had been dead for approximately 4 weeks by the time she was found. The killer had cut her mouth to extend her smile from ear to ear. Forensic sculptor Betty Gatliff was brought in to create a facial reconstruction of the victim, which was circulated to law enforcement agencies throughout the region over the following months. The effort produced no match. Investigators initially estimated the victim was a white woman between 25 and 35 years old, standing 5 feet to 5 feet 4 inches tall with brown hair. Blood testing conducted weeks later overturned this assessment, revealing Native American ancestry and a younger age range of 18 to 22. Subsequent dental and intestinal analysis suggested she had come from an impoverished background, leading investigators to conclude she had likely been homeless at the time of her death. Because the neighborhood where her remains were found was known locally for illegal work, police also suspected she may have been an escort. More than 3 years after the discovery of the first victim, another gruesome scene was found. On Thursday, April 19th, 1979, a group of neighborhood children were playing basketball in a park roughly half a mile north of where the first victim's remains had turned up. A dog accompanying the children had been let loose to wander during the game and disappeared briefly into a nearby field. When it returned to the group, it was carrying a human head in its mouth. The children's screams brought adults running, and police were summoned to the park within minutes. Once officers confirmed the object was, in fact, a severed human head, they immediately deployed police dogs to search the surrounding area, suspecting more remains might be nearby given the previous case in the same general part of the city. Search dogs began locating additional pieces of the victim's body scattered across several blocks of the neighborhood, some of which had been individually wrapped in newspaper or stuffed into paper bags before being discarded in alleys, yards, and vacant lots. Investigators combing the scene noted something distinctly different from the 1976 case. The recovered body parts were conspicuously clean, almost entirely free of blood. This indicated the killer had taken the time to wash and rinse each piece of the body before disposing of it. This level of care was not seen with the first victim, whose remains had simply been left inside the abandoned house where she was killed. Among the pieces recovered in the earliest hours and days of the search were the victim's left hand, part of her pelvis, and additional flesh, all found scattered at different points relatively close to the original discovery in the park. Investigators also found a bloody shoe near one of the recovery sites, which was later confirmed through forensic testing to belong to the victim. An autopsy conducted on the recovered head determined that the decapitation had been carried out with a single downward stroke beginning behind the ears and continuing down toward the neck. Approximately 6 days after the initial discovery, police confirmed the victim's identity as 22-year-old Arlie Bell Killian, a Native American woman well known to local police. Interestingly, she had been seen alive by family members only about 4 hours before her head was discovered in the park. Killian's life before her death was marked by severe and repeated trauma. Her father, Eddie Killian Jr., had a lengthy documented criminal history and was known to have abused and assaulted multiple family members, including Killian herself. In the years following that attack, she developed a serious substance abuse problem that compounded her existing struggles, eventually pushing her into homelessness by the time she reached adulthood. Police records indicated that she had multiple prior contacts with law enforcement dating back to her teenage years, primarily for vagrancy-related offenses tied to her living on the streets of Oklahoma City. As her homelessness continued, she reportedly became entangled in the trafficking space, a detail that investigators later connected to the broader pattern they observed across all 3 eventual victims of the killer. Each was a young, homeless Native American woman believed to have been involved in the same line of work at the time of her death. In the days and weeks that followed, police were repeatedly called back into the neighborhood as additional pieces of her body continued to surface in different locations. This continued sporadically for close to 2 weeks, with some sources indicating the disposal process stretched even further into early May and beyond. The most significant of these later discoveries came on May 1st, 1979, when the bulk of Killian's remaining body was found just 1 or 2 blocks from the abandoned house where the previous victim was found. Some investigators went further, speculating that the drawn-out, staggered nature of the body's disposal suggested the killer was deliberately toying with police. The intensity of the investigation led police to detain 2 men in the days following the initial discovery. The first, a man named Eugene Johnson, was picked up and held for a mental evaluation, with police describing him only as a material witness rather than a named suspect. He was released shortly afterward without charges, apparently cleared of any involvement. The second, and by far more significant suspect, was Killian's own brother, Perry Lee. Perry had an extensive and well-documented history of violent, erratic behavior in the years leading up to his sister's murder. In 1976, Perry had butchered 2 of his grandmother's dogs with a hatchet on March 27th, just days before that first victim's remains were discovered in the abandoned house. He confessed to killing the dogs and led police directly to buckets where he had placed their remains, and at the time, he was living with his grandmother roughly 3 miles south of the crime scenes across the Oklahoma River. Following that incident, he was placed in a mental institution but was released within about a year. In 1978, he was recommitted after attacking his grandmother with a knife. Then on April 19, 1979, the very day his sister was murdered, Perry escaped from custody at the institution where he was being held. This timing made him a compelling suspect. He was apprehended on April 24, 1979, 1 day before police publicly announced Killian's identity, and was subjected to extensive interrogation and psychological evaluation. However, as more of Killian's remains continued to surface over the following days, investigators began to doubt his guilt. Critically, by the time the bulk of her body was dumped, Perry had already been back in custody for a week, making it logistically implausible for him to have carried out that disposal himself. Compounding this, when questioned, Perry was found to be largely incoherent as a result of his serious mental illness, and investigators were unable to connect him to the crime through any physical or circumstantial evidence. He was ultimately cleared and released from suspicion. Following the failed efforts to pin the murder on either suspect, the investigation stalled for several years. No new leads, suspects, or victims emerged, and the case slipped from the forefront of public attention. That changed in 1983 when a notorious criminal named Henry Lee Lucas was arrested on a weapons charge. Lucas, born August 23, 1936, had a long and violent history that predated his arrest by decades. He had already been convicted of murdering his own mother in 1960, and by the early 1980s, he had formed a close and volatile partnership with a fellow drifter, Otis Toole, whom he had met at a soup kitchen. The 2 men traveled together, and Lucas later claimed the pair had killed more than 100 victims together between 1979 and 1981 alone, with Toole allegedly participating in acts of cannibalism involving some of the victims' remains. Following his 1983 arrest, Lucas began confessing at a staggering rate, eventually claiming responsibility for as many as 3,000 murders across the country, spanning 26 states over a period from his 1975 release from prison to his 1983 arrest. An average pace investigators later noted would amount to roughly 1 murder committed per day. Otis Toole, once captured separately, began corroborating many of Lucas's claims, and at various points the 2 men's combined confessions were estimated by police at anywhere from 69 to over 200 murders, with some counts climbing even higher. Among the thousands of murders Lucas confessed to was the killing of Arlie Killian in Oklahoma City. Given how widely Lucas's confessions were being circulated and cross-checked against unsolved case files nationwide, Oklahoma City investigators were notified and traveled to interview him directly, hoping his confession might finally close the case and, by extension, shed light on the connection to the other still unidentified victim. Over the course of 1983 and into 1984, Oklahoma investigators met with Lucas on multiple occasions. It gradually became clear to journalists and investigators that Lucas was confessing indiscriminately in order to secure a variety of personal benefits. Court and investigative records indicate he received favorable treatment from authorities in exchange for his cooperation, including simple prison comforts such as coffee and cigarettes, along with the ability to travel outside his cell under police escort to visit crime scenes and meet with investigators from around the country. Under stricter scrutiny, it was later realized that many of the crimes did not make any geographical sense and would have been impossible to carry out. Such was the case with Killian's murder. Nearly 7 years passed without any confirmed activity connected to the earlier crimes, which would later become central to investigators' theories about who the perpetrator might be and what could have kept him dormant for so long. The silence broke on Thursday, March 6, 1986. That the discovery again fell on a Thursday was noted by some who later chronicled the case, echoing the Thursday timing of both the 1976 and 1979 discoveries. On that day, a man living at 501 Northeast 1st Street in Oklahoma City was walking through his own backyard when he glanced over the fence into the alleyway just beyond his property line. In the tall grass of that alley, he found a woman's dismembered torso. Continuing a few feet further, he found a severed leg, and additional pieces of skin and tissue were also recovered nearby. The man, later identified as Albert Archie, immediately reported his discovery to police. As with the 1979 remains of Killian, there was something distinctly unnatural about the body parts. Rather than being caked in blood, as would be expected from a fresh dismemberment, the torso and leg had been methodically cleaned and rinsed before being left in the alley, leaving them with a bizarre, almost sterile, bloodless appearance. Word spread quickly among investigators that the two cases shared similar characteristics. Believing that this case was tied to the previous two, officials braced themselves for finding additional remains in the days and weeks to come. 6 days later, on March 12th, just around the block from where the torso and leg had been discovered, someone came upon a garbage bin that had been deliberately set on fire. Once the flames were extinguished and the bin's contents were examined, investigators discovered the victim's head inside. The fire had burned so close to the head that a significant portion of the victim's face had been destroyed by the time it was found. Despite the fire damage, investigators were able to identify the victim relatively quickly by relying on two distinctive tattoos located on her shoulder, which had survived undamaged on the torso recovered days earlier. Through these tattoos, police identified her as 22-year-old Tina Marcia Sanders. It was determined that Sanders had last been seen alive on March 5th, 1986, just 1 day before her torso was discovered in the alley behind Archie's home. Like the two victims before her, Sanders was believed to have been homeless at the time of her death, and investigators suspected that she worked as an escort. It was at this point that the press and public first began referring to the unidentified killer by the nickname the Oklahoma City Butcher. Yet again, the case seemed to go cold as tips and leads dwindled. However, in 1993, a major revelation occurred regarding the first victim. Her cousin, Andra Medina, contacted Oklahoma City police. Medina had held off reporting her cousin missing for years at her own mother's request, feeling it wasn't her place, but after both her mother and the victim's parents had died, she took action. DNA extracted from one of the victim's teeth was compared against a sample from her family, confirming her identity as Kathy Lynn Shackelford, a member of the Sac and Fox Nation who had run away from home in June 1975 at age 17. She had last been seen roughly 2 months before her death, receiving treatment at Oklahoma City's University Hospital. In a 2008 interview with the Daily Oklahoman, Medina described the extent of the mutilation her cousin suffered, saying the killer, quote, cut off her breasts and mouth open and cut her female organs up and opened her up. Around the late 2000s, a separate but geographically related case drew attention as a possible connection. On March 22, 1989, 75-year-old Audrey Harris was murdered inside her Oklahoma City apartment. Her killer disemboweled her with a knife and his bare hands, discarding several of her organs, before she died a slow and painful death. Her husband, Lloyd Ballantyne, was the initial suspect and spent over a year in jail before being cleared. Years later, re-examined forensic evidence led investigators to Roderick Webster, a nurse's aide with a minor criminal record who had a family connection to the neighborhood. Webster was arrested in 2007 and, after collapsing during an interrogation when confronted with DNA evidence, was convicted of first-degree murder in 2009 and sentenced to life without parole. While Webster has never been charged in connection with the Butcher murders, some investigators have floated him as a person of interest given his access to the area, apparent hostility toward women, and medical background. However, 4 decades later, the case still remains officially unresolved, but investigators are strongly under the impression that the culprit was, or possibly still is, an Oklahoma City resident. Charles Allen Jr., often referred to as Charlie, was born on April 26, 1985 in Haverhill, Massachusetts, the first of 3 children born to Charles Sr. and Anne. He was especially close with his younger sister, Brittany, a bond that would later place her at the center of the case's final moments. Throughout his childhood, the family split their time between 2 homes, their primary residence in Haverhill and a summer property in Gloucester on the state's rocky North Shore. From an early age, Charlie was described as an intelligent person. He earned strong grades in school without needing to work particularly hard for them, and he carried that same natural aptitude into sports and making friends. His parents have since described their son as having a relentless drive rather than raw talent. Whatever Charlie decided to pursue, he gave it his all. This all-or-nothing quality would later resurface in a far more troubling form during the months leading up to his disappearance. 2 pursuits dominated Charlie's adolescence and young adulthood, and both would become central to how investigators and the public viewed him. The first was competitive video gaming, specifically in Half-Life and Counter-Strike. He became one of the most skilled Half-Life players in the world, competing under the online handle Neo. Within the competitive niche of that game, his name carried real weight and recognition. Charlie reportedly chose this name because he was deeply attached to the Matrix movie. The second defining pursuit was tennis. Charlie had genuine skill and potential. It was through tennis that he met Mason Viau, who would go on to become his best friend and ultimately one of the last people in touch with him before he vanished. Friends and family also recall Charlie's fondness for Facebook, an ordinary detail at the time, but one that would later take on major significance the night he disappeared. In 2003, Charlie graduated from Haverhill High School and enrolled at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, where he majored in psychology with plans to pursue medical school. By his senior year, he was living off campus in an apartment in New Bedford, sharing the space with Anthony Costanzo, a friend he had known since high school. However, beneath what seemed like a likable and driven young man was a more complicated situation. Charlie had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had cycling episodes of mania and depression. According to his family, the disorder was not something that derailed his life in any obvious way. It was described as well managed through a combination of therapy and prescribed medication. Outwardly, at least, Charlie continued to function at a high level, but the treatment came at a cost he found difficult to accept. Charlie confided in his sister that the medication made him feel numbed, as though it were flattening the very passion and intensity that fueled his achievements in the first place. Sometime during the summer of 2007, in the months before what would have been his senior year at college, Charlie made the decision to stop taking his bipolar medication. Rather than abandoning treatment outright with no plan, Charlie attempted to substitute with an alternative approach. He tried to regulate his own mood swings through lifestyle adjustments and an increase in physical activity. It was during this specific window that people around Charlie began noticing behavioral shifts, though at the time, none of it came as alarming or dangerous. The most visible change centered on tennis. Charlie had always been enthusiastic about the sport, but that summer his interest intensified to a degree that friends and family later described as bordering on obsession, which wasn't exactly strange given his talent with the sport. But the scale of the shift stood out. When Charlie wasn't physically out on the court practicing, he was spending his downtime watching professional tennis matches on television. Tennis had gone from being one of several interests he balanced against schoolwork, gaming, and social life to something that appeared to consume a disproportional share of his attention and energy. This period also produced the single most consequential decision Charlie made before his disappearance. In September 2007, Charlie told a friend that he had made up his mind to legally change his name. His reason was that he had observed that many professional tennis players carried unique, memorable, almost stage name-like identities, and he reasoned that if he was serious about eventually going pro, he would need a name that stood out in the same way. Charlie followed through and legally changed his name to Neo Babson Maximus. Each piece of the new name had a distinct reason for being chosen. As mentioned, Neo was for the Matrix film and his reputation as a skilled gamer. Babson was drawn from his mother's maiden name, and Maximus was from the character in the Gladiator movie. Understandably, the change unnerved some of the people closest to him. Family and friends found it concerning that Charlie had gone through with an irreversible legal process based on what seemed like silly reasoning. Around early October, Charlie had made one of his regular trips to Providence, Rhode Island to see his sister Brittany and have lunch with their mother. The family made a habit of getting together like this a couple of times a month, and nothing about the visit stood out as different from any other. Charlie had also arranged to have lunch with his father, Charles Sr., near his off-campus apartment in New Bedford on October 11th. The plan fell through when Sr. needed to reschedule, so the two never actually met in person. They still spoke, however, and in hindsight, Sr. later described the conversation as a little bit odd, though he was careful to note that nothing about it rang alarm bells for him in the moment. Around 2 p.m. that same day, Charlie met his friend Mason at the tennis court for a practice session that stretched on for 2 to 3 hours. According to Mason, nothing about Charlie's demeanor during this stretch suggested anything was wrong. During the same conversation, Charlie brought up plans for that night. He wanted to attend a party being hosted by members of the women's tennis team, and he invited Mason to come along with him. After finishing their practice session, the two friends ate dinner together in the campus cafeteria. Following the meal, they split up to shower and get ready separately, agreeing on a specific time and plan to meet up. They would meet again at 8:30 p.m. to head to the party together. At this point, roughly 6.5 hours before the first frantic phone call, Charlie's day still looked completely normal. While Charlie was presumably getting ready for the party, his sister Brittany noticed something odd on social media. Charlie's Facebook page had vanished entirely. Curious and a bit puzzled, she called him to ask what had happened to it. At first, the conversation seemed ordinary. Brittany later recalled that when Charlie first picked up, he mentioned almost in passing that he was getting ready to go to a party. But the moment she raised the subject of his deleted Facebook page, everything changed instantly. Charlie's demeanor shifted within seconds into what she described as absolute terror. Genuine, deep fear unlike anything she had heard from him before. He began speaking rapidly, and he sounded winded as though he were physically running while talking to her. Charlie insisted emphatically that he had not deleted his own Facebook account. Someone else must have done it to him. He told Brittany that very important people were pursuing him because of emails he had sent, and that this was connected to the account deletion. He then warned Brittany that she too was now at risk, and instructed her to leave school immediately and go to their father, reasoning that their father could protect her. When Brittany tried to press him for specifics, Charlie cut the conversation short. His final cryptic statement was, "I can't talk right now, but all the answers are in the periodic table of elements." Interestingly, Charlie named several locations including Florida, Mexico, and Texas to his parents, all of which begin with letter combinations matching element symbols on the table. Though this is more of a fragmented piece of a theory rather than anything concrete. Shortly after, Charlie also left voice messages for both of his parents, and it was here that he shared those previous locations. He added that he had been feeling isolated and needed to be loved more. Both parents listening to these messages independently came away with the same impression. Charlie sounded as though he were running, physically out of breath, and frightened. Unlike the call with Brittany, there is no detailed record of exactly what reasoning Charlie gave his parents for these destinations. Once the family recognized the severity of what they were hearing, they began trying to call Charlie back immediately. Every attempt went straight to voicemail. Mason, on his end, tried reaching Charlie as well when his friend never showed up for their planned meetup. With their son unreachable and clearly in crisis, Charlie's parents notified the school that night and actively tried to locate him on their own. Approximately 7 hours after Charlie's panicked call with his sister, in the very early hours of the following morning, an incident occurred that would later be identified as the last confirmed sighting of him alive. Sources place this incident at roughly 3 a.m. on October 13th. A woman named Jean Boudreau at her home near Dartmouth's College Lane area encountered a shirtless man who had climbed through her second-story bedroom window. When confronted, he explained himself calmly. He was looking for his friend Mason. Boudreau told him that no one named Mason lived there. He apologized politely, even addressing her respectfully as ma'am, before turning and jumping directly back out through the same second-story window he'd entered. He then fled into the wooded area surrounding the property. Boudreau later shared that the man was wearing black sweatpants with a red stripe running down the side along with sneakers, a detail investigators found especially puzzling once this incident was connected to Charlie's case was that he had genuinely been to Mason's actual apartment on numerous occasions before, and the Boudreau residence was nowhere near that real address. This raises an unresolved question that has never been definitively answered, whether Charlie, in a disoriented or manic state, had simply lost track of a location he otherwise knew well, or whether some other factor caused him to end up at an unfamiliar house while apparently still searching for his real friend. Roughly 11 a.m. on October 14th, 3 days after Charlie's last contact with his family, police were dispatched to a residence near Slocum Road, adjacent to the campus, after a resident reported finding an abandoned backpack in their yard. Inside, officers found school notebooks bearing the name Charles Allen. When police followed up with the university to identify the backpack's owner, the school informed them that a student by that name had already been reported missing. This connection is what triggered the university's report to be converted into a full, official police investigation, including bloodhound units and both ground and aerial searches, along with checks of hospitals, shelters, and transportation hubs. Later the same day, Charlie's blue 1999 Ford Expedition was located abandoned on the campus itself. Inside the vehicle, officers found a pillow and a blanket, leading investigators to conclude that Charlie had likely been sleeping in his own car at some point before he vanished. It was only on October 15th that Officer Robert Levinson made the connection between the Boudreau incident and the ongoing search for Charlie 2 days after the incident. Once cross-referenced, investigators determined that the shirtless man who had broken into the home was almost certainly Charlie himself. 4 days after the break-in, Charlie's sneakers were discovered abandoned in a wooded area off Chase Road near the Boudreau property. Despite this, no other physical trace of him was found nearby. Local authorities officially suspended the ground search for Charlie on October 27th, citing a lack of further evidence to pursue. At the time, Captain Scott Brooks was quoted as saying, "People in a manic state pretty much run on adrenaline. We are still attributing his disappearance to that," reflecting the department's working theory that an unmedicated manic episode, not foul play, explained his actions. On the first anniversary of his disappearance, private investigator John Lexise organized a large-scale search involving more than 200 volunteers using multiple search methods. The effort turned up only animal bones, which some took as a hopeful sign that Charlie had not died in the woods that first night. Roughly 2 years after Charlie vanished, on a December morning, a New Bedford resident named Stephen Kelly reported a knock at his door around 4 a.m. He opened it to find a disheveled man not properly dressed for the cold, who asked for help getting back to Southeastern Massachusetts University, the former name of Dartmouth. Wary of a possible home invasion, Kelly stepped away to call police, and by the time officers arrived, the man had vanished. After later viewing photographs, Kelly said he was confident the man had been Charlie. Police searched the surrounding area again, but found nothing. Another intriguing incident occurred on January 3rd, 2021, when a beachcomber discovered the top of a human skull protruding from the sand near the high tide line at Little Beach off Horseneck Road in Dartmouth. The chief medical examiner determined the fragment belonged to a human male of unspecified age, and police believed it had simply washed ashore rather than been deliberately placed there. Charlie's parents submitted DNA samples for comparison against the remains, but as of the most recent reporting, no confirmed match or official result has been publicly released. Unfortunately, on June 11th, 2022, Charlie's mother, Anne, died of colon cancer at age 59, passing without ever learning what happened to her son. The case still remains unsolved, but has seen renewed attention in recent years. The primary theory revolves around Charlie having a manic episode related to his untreated bipolar disorder. Another interesting theory suggests a deliberate disappearance. His former roommate, Anthony Costanzo, has suggested Charlie was intelligent and resourceful enough to disappear on purpose, noting that Charlie had previously used memorized credit card numbers and had a well-connected virtual network that could have helped him vanish. Costanzo also noted that Charlie had shown a growing interest in Scientology's teachings in the months before he disappeared, teachings that reject the existence of mental illness and view psychiatric medication skeptically. Notably, Charlie's family has never quite bought into the manic episode explanation. Instead, they suggested that Charlie was truly in danger from other people. They pointed to the specific repeated warnings Charlie gave about important people coming after him over emails and questioned why his computer and email history were completely wiped.